Okay, so I've been thinking about building an application in public. The application is going to be called SnappyFeatures. It's going to be a fairly simple application that allows a SaaS owner to type in a list of features that they have just released and display these essentially as a change log to their customers. Now, one of the reasons I've decided to build this is that there's a lot of people doing hello world examples for serverless. There's not a lot of people showing you how to build a real application, a full application, and I'd like to try and change that a little bit. So I'm going to start just by creating a backend for it. I could use Amplify to do all of this, so Amplify CLI, but I think I'm going to do this using serverless instead, and I'll just have to deploy all the packages individually. So I can start by creating probably just a GraphQL API package. So I'll use the SLS command to create -t, and I'm going to use the AWS Node.js TypeScript template, and I'm going to create it in I'm going to name my project GraphQL. Maybe I better have a look and see why this was done. Okay, it's good, it's all successful. It's created this in my root folder, which is probably not what I wanted. So I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'll call this one GraphQL, and I'm just going to move all those packages into there except for the README. So move those and move these. Okay, now there are plugins available that I could use to set up the GraphQL API, but I think I'm just going to do this manually. So if I want any of this to actually work, I need to disable the Serverless Webpack plugin for now, because I'm not going to actually deploy any functions. So I'll remove the functions as well. I need to create a resources section, and I need to add some resources to that. So the first resource I'm going to add is a GraphQL API. So I'll just copy this from the AWS documentation, and I'll create a new thing called GraphQL API, and just paste all of that in. GraphQL API. Now I need to set a couple of things on here. I don't care about the OpenID connect config because I'm not going to use OpenID. I do care about the authentication type and the. So for authentication type, let me just see what my options are here. So I'm going to use the Amazon Cognito User Pools. So we'll set that up. The name for the GraphQL API, so I'm going to add a custom section up here, and then I'm going to set the GraphQL API name. Now, before I can set that, what I need to do is I need to set where are we? I need to set my stage. So my stage is going to be $opt stage, or the default dev, and I'm just going to also set my region up here to $opt region. And I want to deploy this probably in the US, so I might deploy this a little bit closer to me, so US West 2, which is Oregon. Now, in the GraphQL API name, I'm going to call this GraphQL API Snappy SnappyFeatures dash, and I'm going to get from this file the custom, the provider dot stage. So by doing this, it means that I can deploy the same serverless application to different stages, and each stage will get a separate name. So down here where I need to name it, I will use dollar and then self custom dot, and what did I call this? GraphQL API name, which is good. I do want a log config, but I'm going to put that in a little bit later. And before I do that, I need to set up a Cognito User Pool. So my User Pool config, if I have a quick look at this, so this is my User Pool config, so I'll copy that and I'll stick that into here and just indent that a little bit better. Okay. Now I don't need to provide the API client regex, so I'm not going to do that because I don't care which app client is logging in. The user pool ID I'm going to need, the AWS region I'm going to need, so everything's going to be deployed all to the same region, so I can get that from using self provider.region. And I'm going to set up my default action to allow. If you want to know where that's coming from, you need to look at the documentation for the API instead of the CloudFormation, but I happen to know that allow is one of the values, and it's actually the one that I want. So the one thing I haven't got here is my user pool ID. So to get my user pool ID, I need to set up a Cognito user pool. So if I go to Amazon Cognito and user pool, try again, user pool. All right, so I need to set up a user pool. So let's copy all of this and go back to here. So set up my user pool and I'll indent all of this. Okay, so what have I got here? Admin create user. So allow admin create users only. I think I can just use defaults for all of this. So invite message template, unused account validity. So I don't really care about this. So I'm going to take out the admin create user pool template because I don't need that. If we go back, the alias attributes. So support attributes, alias for user pools. So I'm going to set this up to be just an email only. Allow auto-verified attributes, possible values, email, and phone number. So I'm not going to set this up. I don't want to do auto-verify attributes. Device configuration. So let's just look at this. Challenge on required. Device on user prompt. I don't need any of those settings. So I'll remove those. Email configuration. So this is for if I'm going to send out emails, which will happen. So if somebody needs to log in and verify their account, the only one I'm going to worry about here is the reply to address. So I'll set up a reply to address, and I'm just going to put that up here. So reply to address, and I will make that always no reply at, well, let's just assume I can get this domain for now. Haven't actually checked yet, so hopefully we can. SnappyFeatures, so in my email config, so this will become $self.custom dot, and then my reply to address. Okay, so we also have email verification messages, subjects, which I don't actually really worry about. I'm not doing anything with lambdas at this point. I don't want to use any triggers on there. The MFA config, I'm just going to leave this as default. We'll get to the policies, so I don't need any of this stuff here. Let's just check the policies associated with it. So this is the password policy, so I think I'll just leave the default password policy in place for now. You can use this though to set up your password policy to something a little bit more to your needs. So you can set things like the minimum length, whether you require lowercase, uppercase, numbers, symbols, etc. I'm going to use the default policy, so I'm not too fussed about that at the moment. So the schema is a list of attributes for the new user pool. So these are attributes that are stored against the user, and I don't like storing attributes in Cognito user pools. So one of the reasons I don't like this is that if you ever need to make changes to user attributes, then you need to recreate the Cognito user pool, which means you lose all of your accounts. So my preference is to store all of the user information somewhere else, so probably a DynamoDB table, and I'm just going to use the Cognito user pool to store the basic information, the basic account information, so email addresses, passwords. It'll probably have their name in there and a few other bits and pieces, but realistically I'm going to be getting all of that out of the DynamoDB table anyway. The SMS authentication messages I'm going to leave as default, same with the SMS verification, so I'm not too worried about what those are. Okay, so if I go look at the username attribute, so specify whether an email address or phone number can be specified as a username. The user signs up possible values, phone number or email. I need to check on this one. I don't think I need to set anything here. I think this is to do with when you're setting up a username. So when you're setting up Cognito logins, you can use a username for a login, in which case you can do an optional phone number or email address, and the phone number and the email address actually get moved around between the accounts, which is kind of funny. So it's like if you create an account with an email address and then you create another account with that same email address, it will let you do it. But the email address will now be associated with the second account, not with the first account. So it's a little funny about that. So a user pool name. So I need a user pool name. So let's try and do that the same way that I've done my GraphQL API name. So let's have a user pool name, and I can copy, where did I stick it here? So I can copy this, and where's my user pool name, and user pool name, and put that into there. So I'm not going to worry about schema attributes or the username attributes or the user pool tags. So that's got all that done. Now, what else do I need to get in there? So I know at some point I'm going to have to get a user pool client set up. So the client's going to be needed so I can log in to the user pool. So I might as well get that set up while I'm here. So I'll set up a user pool client, oops, user pool client, just indent that, and I'm just going to call this default because the client doesn't really matter too much, the client name. So I don't care about the explicit auth flows. I'm happy to leave that with the default values, which is fine. Generate secret. So I don't want to generate a secret. I know I don't want to generate a secret because it will cause problems with AppSync. Sorry, not with AppSync, with Amplify if I do. The read attributes, I'm not worried about restricting the read attributes. The token validities, the refresh token validity. So this is basically how long before you need to log back in again. So I'm going to set this to 30 for 30 days. And the right attributes, I'm not going to set the right attributes. Okay, so the user pool ID, I need to get that. So if I go back to the user pool, so this is my user pool page. If I go down to the bottom of the user pool page, it has some return values here, which are useful. So we can see that we can use get@, to get the provider name, the provider URL, and the ARN, and get the logical ID here. So this is what we need. So we need to do a ref. So what I can do in here is I can put in the shorthand version of this. So ref, and then it's going to ref the user pool, and that will ref the user pool. And I need to do the same thing down here. So I'll just copy that and I'll paste that down there. And that should be enough to get my GraphQL endpoint up and running. So if you just give me 1 second, I'm just going to duck out and make sure I've got some credentials set up, and then I will come back. Okay, so I've got my credentials, so let's just deploy this and see what happens. So we'll do a serverless deploy. I don't need to specify the stage or the region because they're already set. I do need to specify my AWS profile because I don't have one of those in there yet. So my AWS profile will be YouTube, and we'll let this go and deploy. That doesn't seem very good. Not sure why that didn't work. Let me just try enabling all of this. I know why it didn't work. So I need to do an npm in. Sorry, I'm not in the right package. I'm in the right folder, sorry. So let's redo those, save that, and try doing a deploy again. Okay, let's provide.stage. So you just look up here, provide.stage. Should obviously be provider.stage. So serverless will now go off and package everything up and deploy this to AWS for me. And once that's done, we can log into the AppSync console and have a look at it. because this is the first time I'm creating it, it's got to create a stack first before I can do the update. So I'll just wait for this to finish. Okay, looks like we've got some errors in there. So view the full error output at error code. Property evaluation does not match type. So that was we decided we didn't need the policies, so let's redeploy again. Okay, it's deployed. So I'll just go to the AWS console. If you just give me a second, I'm going to pause the video while I log in. Okay, so I'm logged into the console. Let's just have a quick look at AppSync. And if I change my region to US West 2, so Oregon. Okay, here's my SnappyFeatures API. It's been set up. We don't have a schema at the moment. So if I look at that, nothing shows up, which is okay. There are no data sources, no functions, queries won't do anything. In the settings, I have my URL, I have my app ID, you can have my API name. It's set up to use Cognito User Pool. It's set up already with the User Pool configuration. I don't have logs enabled at the moment. I will enable those a little bit later. And if I go to Cognito and I look at my user pools, so I have a user pool set up and all good to go. If I just look at my attributes, so at the moment it's set up to do username authentication, and it will also allow you to sign in with a verified email address. So I'm using this because that will allow me to use Amplify. So Amplify, the sign in and sign up, uses the username by default. You can change it to use the email address or phone number only. I might do that before the whole thing goes into production, but for now, this is going to do me. Okay, so having done that, the next thing I need to do is I need to get a schema up and running. So if I go back to, if I close that down and I go back to AppSync, and I can add a schema. So to add a schema, I just need to add an extra object to my cloud formation. So I'm going to call this one GraphQL. GraphQL schema, and I need the app ID for my GraphQL API endpoint. So if I go to my GraphQL API, and if I scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to see the outputs again. So I must have gone past it. Here we go. So the API ID, I need to use the getApp function. So I'm going to use the shorthand version of this again because I like the shorthand versions. So exclamation get at. Now the first parameter for this is going to be GraphQL API, and the second parameter is going to be the API ID. Okay, now the definition, I'm going to do this inline, but I'm going to cheat a little bit here. So I'm going to start by taking out the definition S3 location, because I'm not uploading it to S3. I would like to keep it out of this file if I can. So what I can do is I can create a file called schema.graphql, which will be my GraphQL schema. So I need to have a type query, and I'm just going to put in for now something really simple. So I'm going to have a hello attribute that will return a string, and I'm going to have a schema, and the schema will have query of type query. I'm not going to worry about mutations or subscriptions at this point. I just want to show you sort of getting this up and running. So if I go back to here, so I need to put that definition inline here. So the way you can do that is if I just quickly Google for serverless framework file, it's variables. Just wait for this to load up. So file, external JSON YAML files. So I can use this syntax here to import it. What I'm going to do is just cheat a little bit here. So I'm going to import this from the file schema.graphql. Now if I don't tell it to look for a property in that file, it will just import the entire file for me. So this should all be happy now. So I've got a GraphQL schema. It's all attached to the API. I'm not going to worry about that. If I redo a deploy again, this shouldn't take as long as it did last time. And I should have my schema attached. Okay, we go back to the AppSync console and I look at AppSync. Go into AppSync, look at my schema, and now we have a schema attached. Okay, so we're all good to go here. I think I might end the video for today at this point. Next video, I will set up the proper schema for it, along with all of the data sources and the tables, so that I can actually save data, and I'll set up some resolvers for it as well, so that it's actually going to store data in there, and that will get the API up and running. And then after that, I'll start on the front end videos. So if you like this, go to www.goingserverless.com and sign up to the mailing list, and you'll get notifications when I release videos. Also click the subscribe button below. So, I think we've got like 4 subscribers at the moment. It would be great to get that over the 100 mark so that I can get a custom name for the channel. So subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications through YouTube as well. And till next time.